we ain't giving up no mountain. We ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one grass, not a bit of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, the time when night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain. We ain't giving up no
Nation for December 9th, 2022. Welcome. You know, as I do, once we get started, I will ask you to call up a neighbor, call up a friend, let them know that Facing the Nation is on. You can follow us on our social media platforms, the People's National Congress Reform page, Facebook. You can also follow us on APNU AFC page on Facebook. And a bit later down, you'll also see the program on our YouTube page, People's National Congress Reform. So ensure that you make those calls very quickly. And if you're on the social media platforms, ensure that you share the program. Because today's program, we're going to have a very good chat with my guest. My guest is no stranger to Facing the Nation. Today, he has been here a couple of times, and today is going to be no different while we talk about some important things that are happening around us as it's happening, it's unfolding, and we're seeing a lot more happening in the especially the oil and gas sector when it comes to finances and programs, and we saw Parliament recently. So welcome to my guest, Mr. Elson Lowe.
Hi, good day. Always a pleasant to be here. Always a fun time. I'm happy to chat on, I think, a few really important issues, especially relating to the oil and gas and economic sphere, which is where I typically comment. And we've had quite a few developments in the past few days, so we can chat a bit about those.
All right, thank you. I mean, generally, I'd start my program asking like questions, but
Sure.
You've been here a few times already.
I wouldn't say no to a light question.
You've been here a couple of times already, and I think by now my guests are getting comfortable with you. They see you on your programs and that kind of thing. But I want to know, what is your feel in terms of how, with the programs that you're running, what is your feedback like from the audience, when you do these programs and share the type of information you do?
Well, a lot of people always thank me for sharing this information. They seem to find it very informative. I was in the shop recently, and a random person came up to me and said, "Thank you for your work." And I said, "No problem." But you try to do the best you can. And this is a time of great change, really, in Guyana. And so it is important, really vital, to keep people informed about what is going on and how the country is changing. We want to ensure that no one is left behind, that no one is not informed about what's going on, because many people obviously are benefiting from these changes. We want to, and of course, this is really the position of the opposition, is that everyone should benefit as Guyana becomes quite wealthy and as the country grows. So that is really why it is so important to let everyone know what the changes are. But also, I think that it's important to give people's perspective, and this is where I hope that my viewers can take away something that they can act on right now, and that they should act on right now, which is that we must also have a sense of when the government is shortchanging us in terms of what they should be doing for the Guyanese people. And there's been many instances this year in particular where the government has really failed the Guyanese people in a time of crisis. And so we want viewers to understand, to get the perspective, to be able to understand where it is that the government is shortchanging them, and why they should pressure the government to offer more.
And I know, I've spoken to persons like Sherrod Duncan when I would have interviewed him, and a few other persons who have shows, and they talk about the type of concerns that are raised. I mean, your show is typically a little different from the others. What are some of the concerns that people usually share with you if they,
Yeah,
inbox
sure.
you, etc.?
Well, I'd say first off, you get, and this is perhaps as a result of blending perspective, you get a lot of cries of frustration,
Mm,
of real frustration from people. First of all, because I'm sure that in this cost of living crisis, their daily lives have become more difficult.
mm-hmm.
If, for me, I like wings. If I'm eating wings and the wings gone through the roof, I can only imagine how difficult it is for everyone. So that is one area of that I think comes across.
Mm-hmm.
I think people also express a real disgust with the government once they have a sense of what it is that they should be
Should be
getting,
getting.
and people will then share with me their experiences, their own experiences where the government is falling short, whether it is a road that has not been fixed, whether it is GPL.
Mm-hmm.
People will express those concerns to me, and I try to bring those out in my show so
Mm-hmm.
that the Guyanese people are really aware of the problems that we may think that our problems are individual problems, or it's
Mm-hmm.
my street, or it's my blackout problem, my area getting blackout. But that's not the
Nothing.
case. It's across the country we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing these types of problems. And that, I think, is a sad indictment of the way that the country is being governed. And the level of frustration that we're seeing is similarly a sad indictment of that. So that's what you get in terms of people's feelings
Feeling.
about this about these circumstances. But on the flip side, as I mentioned, it's nice that many people seem to appreciate that they're getting a sense of what's going on. I think that's really great.
All right. So now we go into the
Sure, sure,
details.
sure.
There we recently had the announcement about the carbon
Yeah.
credits, and I want my viewers, because
Mm,
of course my program is a little different from yours, and we still
sure,
want all our viewers to get
sure.
an idea of what is happening. Could you give us, like a breakdown? What is
Yes,
it about?
yes,
And, what are the benefits that we should be having
yes,
from it, and that
yes.
kind of stuff?
So essentially, the government is receiving around about 750 million US as a result of preserving forests in the past, and there's monies that are associated with preserving forests in the future.
Future.
Viewers may know, may not know, but Guyana has, first of all, one of the highest percentages of forest cover,
Hmm.
but also some of the highest percentages of untouched forests. So
Hmm.
that's been true from time immemorial, really.
Hmm.
What this is in terms of these carbon credits is a payment from HES where they're trying to, whether it's through their corporate social responsibility or other mechanisms,
Hmm.
offset their carbon emissions. Of course, HES is an oil producer, so it would have significant contribution to the overall carbon emissions in the world.
Hmm.
So that's really where the money is coming from. It's a compensation for us keeping our forests standing.
Hmm.
Now, that is one element of it, which
Hmm.
is good that Guyana is getting funds. That's fine. The other element of it, which is what we mentioned at the last press conference, is it is one thing to get funds, and it is another thing entirely for the people of the country to
To
benefit
benefit from it.
from that.
Hmm.
And we've seen the PVP that that is 100% in question even right now. And we'll talk a bit more about these issues. The sovereign wealth fund has nearly 1.4 billion US in it.
Hmm.
We've seen the government spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of US from oil revenues already.
Hmm.
But yet citizens are scratching their heads as to where this money has gone. It is, I think, a real anxiety in the opposition, but in the population more broadly, and especially, I think, in Amerindian communities and so on, where
Hmm.
some of this money is supposed to go there.
Hmm.
As to how the money will be dispersed, as to in what ways, so that it is fair, reasonable, so that it provides for the communities that need help the most. Whereas it has been the practice thus far we've seen would be to serve their friends, families, and favorites. With,
Well, the question with that would be,
yeah.
has the government, in having this, and this was something they knew that was coming,
Mhm.
has there been a program, a plan
Mhm.
released to the public for
Exactly.
us to see?
There's nothing to my to my understanding that is broken down how this money will be used. We know
Mhm.
that about 100 and I think it's 112 million US will go towards Amerindian communities, something in that figure, and the rest will go towards I think the broader consolidated fund. So that's funds that will be available to be spent in Guyana in various ways. However, there's a couple of key issues here. One is what level of consultation took place with Amerindian communities regarding these funds. Amerindian communities, of course, are in many cases the communities that are responsible for forest conservation and so on. So the question is that an appropriate amount for Amerindian communities to be benefiting from? And one of the things that I think is important to point your viewers towards, and we don't talk enough about in Guyana, is that when you look at poverty statistics, Amerindians are far and away the poorest population in Guyana. There was recently a study done of major contracts awarded by the National Procurement and Tender Administration, and no contracts were awarded to people of Amerindian descent, as much as we saw an outsized amount of contracts awarded to people of Indian descent, which is something that to discuss. Not seeing any really be awarded to Amerindians is very concerning. So the question is, what is this money going to be put in towards the best use for people of Amerindian descent? But also, should people of Amerindian descent be getting more in order to address some of the poverty issues and so on in those communities? Now, the problem with not seeing a plan released as to how these funds will be used, which you're raising, is that it then leaves us really with the question as to whether there's going to be progress in Amerindian communities in alleviating any of these concerns. And that, I think, is a very reasonable concern, a very reasonable worry. And I think that anyone who is looking at the governance of Guyana and does not see a plan as to how funds will be used and consultation is very much warranted in being concerned. And I think, unfortunately, in Guyana, we've developed quite a pessimistic spirit, and that's because we don't see these things,
and because of what we've already seen happening. There is the issue of we've seen another supplementary budget being put forward to Parliament, which was passed in Parliament on Monday, I think it was. And this is the second one for the year. And that in itself should raise big alarms. Because if you have properly planned and
you should only
catered for,
if anything,
in the year, in your regular budget, if there is any lapse, any small thing that needs to be done, we might expect one supplementary budget coming. But we see two supplementary budgets for the year. And in both supplementary budgets, and probably I will add as well the 2022 budget generally, it's less than 5% has been allocated to handle cost of living.
Well, actually,
somewhere thereabouts.
No, well, I can. I think you said a couple of things that are very insightful. The first being, why two, why not one? That's a failure of planning. The second being, and I don't know if your viewers have noticed this, but do you find it interesting that both supplemental budgets are the same almost amount?
Yes, all two are four point something billion dollars, just off by a little niche on both ends.
That makes it sound like they plan to do two supplementals all along.
Right, they just split it in half.
So that it's more palatable.
In fact, they probably thought about it. We're going to have this big amount, but you know what? It's going to raise a lot of land. So let's split it down the middle.
Exactly, right? It's like very transparent.
Correct. And I think as Guyanese, these are the harder questions that we must ask, and not just ask, because I feel a lot of the time citizens don't understand their role. The government has a role, the opposition has a role, and as a citizen, you have a role and a part to play. And the government should be made answerable for these kind of things. Especially when we're sitting in the kind of environment we're sitting in, and we're seeing public servants and generally regular people in Guyana being put to blows without any aid, any compensation, with all of this wealth that has now been
Yeah,
surrounding us
absolutely.
in such a heavy way.
Yeah, and I think there are several red flags that
With the supplementary.
come out of the budgeting process this year. We must recall this is the first year where oil money is being spent, so it is really an important year to get a sense of the way that oil monies will be
Would
spent,
spend.
and how the planning, what the planning process will be like.
Mhm.
Several alarming things, but I think we should start from the perspective that, and this is an important one for Guyanese to kind of understand. Guyana is an immensely wealthy country. That is something that we've got to reset our expectations.
Mhm.
Can you imagine that just the initial budget was 4% larger than the previous
Previous.
year's budget, and public servants get 8% raise? In order to keep pace with the budget, they're supposed to get a 44% raise.
Mhm.
We've said they need to get at least 25%,
Mhm.
because it needs to keep pace with the food inflation between last year and this year.
Mhm.
At least it should compensate them for the roaring prices in the market.
Yes.
But when we see a budget move like that, and you see all that money being spent, and hardly any going to public servants, you get a sense that the government is really shortchanging people, and that the wealth that the country is now experiencing is not being distributed fairly. It is not we're saying public servants should get an increase greater than the increase that we've seen in the budget. We're saying it should just keep pace. Simple as that.
And basically allow persons to have
Yeah.
an income that is livable.
Exactly. The point of it being, which is why we always want to mention the livable income here in Guyana, is we believe that all Guyanese should share in the wealth of the country and in the growth that the country is experiencing. We are not on board with the idea that friends, family, and favorites are the only ones who should be benefiting from our oil resources. Now, when you tie that into the actual budget, this actual supplemental, when you look at that, because it is one thing for us to say generally what should happen, but let's look at the actual supplemental itself. Almost nothing there for cost of living mitigation. The only thing is that they've kept electricity prices stable, but there's no cash grant. There's no effort to bring down fuel prices, as we've spoken about, effort to bring down prices at the market.
Market prices.
There's nothing like that. And this is really the circumstance in which you would want to see those things. What with us facing a cost of living crisis the entire year? The entire year. So what is the purpose of a supplemental budget if it does not address the unexpected problems that have come up over the year? That's the first thing. The second thing is, what is actually in it? Well, what is in it? The biggest line item is upgrade of roads and drainage.
I was going to bring out the point that the last supplementary, almost the majority of that money went to public works. Where they're looking into specifically infrastructure in terms of roads, etc. And we keep talking as an opposition and pointing out every time we see money spent, it's being spent in a specific zone where a certain group of people are able to gain money. When I hear about the amount of money that is being put into public work, it reminds me of the East Coast Highway that practically took more than 10 years thereabout.
Long time.
Or maybe more, because I could be missing.
It took a long time.
To build that road that eventually had to be completed under the coalition government. I lived on the East Coast, and I remember every morning passing, they would throw sand at the side. They would dig out the edges of the road, throw sand. You wouldn't see anything happen again for months. They'll come back another time and they'll throw sand again. But every time this is happening and this prolonged period with this road, somebody is benefiting.
Well, there you go.
I like to point out only recently when we were dealing with Cricket Carnival, we saw the road by Grove. We all saw the notices. You were told if you have to go to the airport, you need to leave at a specific time because there's going to be blockage for these roads to be done.
Exactly.
Cricket Carnival came, the road, at least the majority of what they should have done, was completed. And I kid you not, I had a relative who came during that time and eventually had to come back 3 weeks later. And when they came back 3 weeks later, the very road that was done during the Cricket Carnival period was in an awful state. And here, and this is why I want us to understand, every time you're bringing these supplementals, these are the things that you're throwing the largest money into. It leaves the door open for friends, family, and favorites
100%
to gain all this wealth that we're talking about here. But the average person, they're not getting.
Yeah, well, one of the experiences that some countries have had with oil and corruption is that the infrastructure projects become no longer about the infrastructure. The purpose of the projects is to steal money. That is the purpose of the projects. And so when you see a road disintegrate, you have to ask yourself whether this is worthy of a proper investigation to see whether we got value for money and if procurement fraud occurred. And there's a couple of examples that were particularly egregious. The road on Thomas Lands, that leads along the national park, where there was again disruption. The road was fixed, and then only a few short mornings afterward, the road started to give way. The road next to UG, where I think after only 2 days, the road started to give way. Those are the most, I think, obvious examples, but there are many examples. And the fact that citizens are complaining nonstop about all of these potholes that they're coming across is indicative of the fact that there's definitely something wrong with the procurement system. In that, how is it that we keep seeing these problems? It must be that there's an intention by the government to facilitate.
To facilitate it, because I wanted to put in here, it's not just the procurement system that has a problem. Because in your procurement system, you have whoever you give these contracts. They are engineers who are from the government that should also be examining the work and ensuring that it is to standard. And if they are missing these things, then one is to think, what's the reason behind it?
I would ask you an interesting question. How many engineers have been fired from the government?
None that I know of.
After certifying works that a couple of weeks later.
But we always hear the minister bashing contractors. He proudly stood in the National Assembly. And in fact, today I received a call from someone who called to complain about something he talked about in the National Assembly on Monday, where he talked about the road in Pleasance being done. Now, the road in Pleasance was started Prince William Street specifically, and half of Prince William Street, because he ventured out to say a lot of things that were very inaccurate in Parliament, as they usually do in grand style, like call them the King Liar crew, because they say things so glamorously and with all the drama behind it, and they very well know that they're not speaking the truth. But the person complained the fact that these roads were started somewhere around March to April. If you are planning works for a road, you have to understand as well what your weather systems are like, when are you likely to have heavy rains, etc. And to date, we're in December. That road, that small part of the road that you're doing has not been completed. It is actually worse now than they came and met it because of them digging it out and just leaving it, the rain. And, we talk about these things a lot. And this is why I like to, talk to my viewers about what as citizens we should be doing. Because these things, when we see them in our communities and we experience things, we ought to speak out as well. The only way the government is going to be pressured into dealing with these matters is when citizens raise the concerns, they raise their voices, and they hold the government accountable. Whoever the government is, the opposition has a role. The opposition role, as major part of their role, is to expose what is being done by the government. Now it's the citizen to
Yeah.
come with
Yeah.
the opposition to then hold them accountable together.
Yeah.
Because there are things beyond just a group of people you call the opposition team or leadership that they
Yeah.
can do. It is the citizens who need to stand up and say enough is enough
Yeah. Yeah.
when it comes to these things.
Well, a simple thing like taking a picture of a road that is disintegrated in no time and throwing it up on Facebook and asking what happened here.
Mhm.
Simple thing
It's
like that will
a
raise
part of it.
awareness as to what is going on
Mhm.
and help people to see the problem.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. The second thing is something you mentioned, which I find to be interesting, is this question of whether. I am convinced that the PVP either refuses to acknowledge that Guyana's rainy season or does not live in Guyana. Because I cannot understand how you can come to Parliament to say that you need additional monies for draining and
In
drainage
the
and this and that.
last
In the
month
last month of the year, when everyone knows that
from a child.
from a child that there's always rainy season in Guyana.
Mhm.
So how could you have
In
not
December.
planned for these drainage works at the beginning of the year? You should have been able to anticipate at least the vast majority. If you have minor works, I understand. But in agricultural ministry, it's $2 billion.
Mhm.
And then separate from that, in that $18 billion is, besides roads, drainage works.
Mhm.
We all saw recently at Coffee Square several cars taking a dip, going
Yeah.
right off. And what I'm saying is, we know in advance every year there's rainy seasons.
Mhm.
Preparation must be made to ensure that the city does not flood and that various parts of the country do not flood. How can you now be acting as if you're surprised, scrambling to go and get some funds? And if you're passing a budget at the beginning of December, you have 3-4 weeks to spend that money. Man, these people
Couple billions
billions of
dollars.
dollars. We're talking about around about $20 billion here. You have 3-4 weeks to spend that 20 billion. It is utterly laughable, but also quite tragic that this is what the country is seeing.
Mhm.
Any reasonable planning process would incorporate the rains that we see all the time. But I would argue that we don't have a reasonable planning process with this government doesn't engage in that. Rather, if your focus is on friends, families, and favorite, you don't care whether it's rain or shine.
Mhm. Correct is right. I want to bring another issue in view. I think my operator may have a billboard that Exxon has been sharing, and it has been making its rounds on social media, and people are talking about it. I think we have it up there on the screen. I want us to have
Mm-hmm.
a little conversation about this particular billboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Now, Exxon is clearly stating, because they're doing their own PR work, as we know,
Well,
to ensure that the population, because we're seeing a push where there's a lot of talk about Exxon and saying that they're doing so badly and they haven't been doing this and doing that. And I have my own
sure, sure.
thoughts about that. But they decided that they will put out the figures and some of the terms that their contract state. And I saw it made the front page of Kaiser News where it says, quote unquote, Guyanese are outraged at this billboard. That's that's
Yeah.
also something else to talk about. But it says here more than 280 billion Guyana dollars for Guyana since 2019. Then it says Guyana received 52% of all profits from Stavro Block, 50% profit share plus 2% royalty. And when Exxon puts this out, they're specifically speaking to the contractual agreement that they would have signed on to. Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I think the first thing that is important to note, and this is where I think in Guyana we not done a good job of really recognizing what's going on in the country. That is well over, was that 1.4 billion US, 280 billion Guyana dollars. That's a lot of money. That figure by itself is larger than entire government budgets that we have had. And this is the beginning of the oil and gas era. So we first of all have to acknowledge that we've been able to see this production come to fruition. We've been able to see it happen at a rapid pace. and that the country is been able to receive quite substantial returns as we go forward. So that's the first thing to note, and that I think is where it's important for us to have a sense, one or another, that the country is immensely wealthy. Our expectations must change, and we must demand that we see progress in our society. That's the jumping off point, which I think is lost a lot in these discussions. But on the flip side of it, one of the things that we must also recognize is that the government, unless it produces a proper audit of Exxon's expenses, is really, really shortchanging the Guyanese people. We are not here, we don't really want to talk about Exxon per se. What we want to talk about is
it's the government's responsibility.
Because they are responsible for ensuring that Exxon is properly audited. Because it's a possibility we don't know that the costs are inflated, and that would mean that we're not getting 50%, but we're getting 30 or 40%. We need to see proper audits so that we know, first of all, what the truth is. But second of all, because it needs to act as a deterrent, so that all companies, not just Exxon, all oil companies doing business in Guyana, think twice before inflating costs and trying to cheat Guyanese. Right? So that is why we need to ensure that we have proper auditing done. Now, the government has, first of all, in the statements that have come out around the audit, there's considerable concern that the audit is not going to meet public expectations, which is where we check to see whether these prices are reasonable prices. You know, I mean, it would be pretty absurd if, as an example, of course, we don't know, an airline were charging twice as much to Exxon as they were charging privately. That would be very concerning. Yeah, that's the type of inflation, that cost inflation, that we don't want to see, especially if it's a company that's affiliated with Exxon, because that means that they're getting some more.
They will be getting some more.
Right. So that's what we don't want to see. But the audit is supposed to give us a sense of whether that is a problem. However, that doesn't seem to be.
Are we building capacity for that?
Well, that's the first thing. The government has made very limited strides to do anything in that regard. The second thing is, though, that the plain words of the contract say that certain costs are not recoverable unless they're competitive. They're competitive in the international market. Unless they're reasonable costs, unless they're fair, they're not recoverable. So on the plain words of the contract, we have to check to see whether they get the appropriate. And for the government not to do that is such a gross dereliction of duty that it would be totally unacceptable. So we first of all need to see the government be clear to the public as to what the scope of this audit is, so that we understand what's going on. This is totally unacceptable, and it could mean, you know, the carbon credits we mentioned right at the beginning of this conversation, about 700 million, 750 million. The amount that we could be losing just from not auditing is the same 750 million.
Correct, and that's a lot of money.
That's a huge amount of money. And this, we're probably going to audit maybe 12 or 13 times over the course of the years. We're going to do quite a few audits, maybe more, maybe less. But if you're going to be losing $700 million every time just because you're too careless to check, or you're corrupt, that to me
sounds more like you're corrupt.
Yeah, you know, is there anything more disgusting than people ripping off the country in that way? That would be disgusting.
I want us to as well look at this in this context. Let's think about it this way. If Guyana is actually getting that we 50 and 2%, which is 52% profit sharing as we speak now, if there was a proper audit and all is clear and all well, and everything is well, and we're getting this, where is that money going in terms of the citizens? And to me, that is the real base of the problem. No matter how much we have to audit, you must know. But once that is done, are the citizens of this country, will this resource be shared the way it should be with all persons, all Guyanese? And to me, what we are seeing displayed here is absolutely unacceptable by a sitting government. I believe if you don't intend to plan, you don't intend to work in the interests of a nation, maybe instead of us having all this shenanigan, you should just pack up and leave
Well,
and allow somebody else to do the
the way
work.
that I would put it, the way that I put it is this, and you're quite right. They should pack up and leave. It is difficult for you to come to such a bad budget unless your focus is on stealing everything in sight.
Mhm,
Because the budget so consistently misses the mark
mhm.
that it is absurd. You mentioned that it is 5% towards cost of living. There's less
Somewhere
than
thereabouts or
1%,
less than.
less than 1% directly towards cost of living mitigation, which is where there is some money for fertilizer, some money for
Yes.
cash grants. This is a 645 billion budget, and you're gonna put a drop in the ocean towards.
And I
There's
don't
no way
want
you
to
could
be
do it.
held
You know,
to the 5% because
yeah.
this is me, I think, splurging on numbers from
Yeah,
what
I
we've
mean,
been
if you
seeing. Because
incorporate other tangential things like maybe electricity, if the electricity is stable, but
I think I'm still splurging on numbers
yeah,
in terms of what was
the
there for
point is it,
mitigation.
and the other thing that's really concerning that Chinese must look at is we as an oil producer have to understand the dynamics of oil. And when the oil price is high, you have high inflation and so on. But you also make much more money as an oil
More than
producer.
you would make in any other
Exactly. When
time.
the oil price is low, you make less. When the oil price is high, you make a lot. And Guyana has made an unexpected $60 billion.
$1 billion. Yes.
You would think that at least the cost of living mitigation budget would be $60 billion.
Because guess what? You
Yeah.
didn't cater for that. It was nowhere in sight.
Unexpected.
You got it. Cost of living is high.
Similarly
Now,
unexpected. So
even if you put
yeah.
half of that, assisting persons with cost of living,
Yeah.
like, you
Yeah.
know what we would be doing
Exactly.
for a country as small as us?
Yeah. There's no justification for benefiting from the high oil price and then refusing to help people who are suffering because when ultimately it is their money, it is the citizens' money. It's just that the government is custodian of that money. So that to me is another.
That
one
would
of
be
those,
another explanation that the
Yeah.
current administration would need to get, that the money sitting
Yeah.
in the coffers of
Yeah.
Guyana is not
Yeah.
their money. It's not the PPPC's money,
Exactly.
but it is the money of the people
Exactly.
of the country.
Exactly.
Hence, it needs to work for them first.
100%.
Mm.
It is utterly ridiculous that you've made all this extra money and you are literally hoarding the money, refusing to help people in their time of need. So instead of getting a 60 billion to help you, you're getting a 5 billion. 1/12 of the amount you're supposed to get.
It's like I'm at home. I'm the person getting money, or let's say my husband is there, I'm there, the children are here, and we're getting a whole lot of money. He's just raking in money. And we decide that we're gonna fix the house. We're gonna expand it.
Sure.
We're gonna beautify it. We're gonna paint it. We're gonna put
Absolutely.
tiles. We're gonna build a garden around, but we have zero food in the house. We're unable to eat. We go to bed every single night hungry.
Yeah.
But guess what? Our house looks beautiful from the
telling you.
outside. And I think literally this is what the government again is
Yeah,
doing to this country right now.
Yeah.
You're seeing, and nobody has a problem with beautification projects.
Sure.
Our country should be advancing in technology, in infrastructure.
Yeah.
But should it be at the cost
Yeah.
of the poor people in our country?
Well, it's a question
Should it be of the cost of our public servants?
Yes. It's a question of priorities.
Correct.
Right? And that's what I'm saying. The government's priorities are so wrong-headed in the face of plenty that you have to ask whether they have any interest in the Guyanese people at all. Because there's no way that you could come to this budget if you were interested in the people of Guyana. This budget is way, way off the mark. And it's not just the initial budget. They've had 2 opportunities to right the wrongs of that initial budget. And they've declined on 2 opportunities to provide assistance to people. So even if you can say, oh, they didn't know that there'd be a war in Ukraine at the beginning of the year, they have had two chances now to help
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who have been suffering from the high food prices, the high oil, prices at the pump that are due to the war in Ukraine, or at least partly due to the war in Ukraine. So they have refused to help.
Correct.
Yeah, and that is, I
Despite
think,
they
yeah.
have all the finances. And I think it is so deliberate. Prior to them coming in, of course, they stated the contract with Exxon was so horrible, it's so terrible. They come in, they don't care about that
Not
anymore.
changing it, not
But
doing
in the
anything.
same breath, they are there while they're getting all of this money that we're
Yeah.
talking about,
Yeah.
they're receiving that can do all of this infrastructure work, but it can't help the people. And you're telling people, oh, don't expect this. You're coming to dampen their spirits
Yeah.
and
Yes.
tell them, don't expect nothing. You ain't going to get nothing.
Yeah.
We are making much. But I want people to also understand, and I think maybe a day we have to do a comparison of the two contracts. The one that was pre 2016 and what is there currently.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, if we had stuck with that contract as well, we would have been way worse.
Yeah, well, there's been
off.
improvements that
There
were made.
were small improvements to it that
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
allowed us to be having some of the money that we're having right now. And as anything, as time goes, you should be allowed to better
Yeah.
what is being done in the confines of the law when it comes to
Yeah. Well,
contracts and agreements.
Absolutely. Well, what has been mentioned is when the original contract was put forward, there were many flaws that were fixed by the coalition. One being that the royalty was recoverable. So after you collect your royalty, they then charge you for the same money. So you weren't actually getting any royalty.
Correct.
That's one of the things that we dealt with. Now,
and the profit as well. We didn't have a 50%. I think it in the older contract
I think it was 50%, but we increased the royalty as well. The royalty was lower, so we increased the royalty. So that's another area that there was benefits. Of course, we didn't know that there'd be 11 billion barrels found and a fine rate of 90-something%. So it's a discussion that will have to be ongoing, and the leader of the opposition has said he wants Guyanese to get as much as they can get from any natural resource. So that's a discussion to be ongoing. But the point of it is that we recognize that there are some issues and we address some of those issues. There are further issues to be addressed. But in the meanwhile, that contract has allowed the oil industry to flourish and to become very robust very quickly.
And the government to flourish as
well. Well, the government, but not the people, eh?
Not the people.
And we must recognize that we've got 2 FPSOs. We've got another FPSO that's coming online shortly. This is very substantial, and we've surpassed Trinidad's production, and we're going to nearly double Trinidad's peak production next year and so on. So from that perspective, the country is moving quickly, and the contract has facilitated that. But it is a discussion to be ongoing as we continue to find oil, and I'm sure this is not the last time Guyana will find oil. But what we as a country, and I keep stressing on this, is something that we must have at the back of our minds, because the PDP is perfectly happy to play down these resources, pretend we're not getting anything, to say, oh, this is not possible, because they intend to steal as much as they can steal. So if you have low expectations, they can steal as much as they can steal. But we must remind Guyanese, this country has the second most barrels of oil per person of any country in the world. When you saw the second vice president there, Jaglio, going to meet folks in Dubai, in UAE, and some of these places, he's going to meet those leaders. And he's acting as if, oh, he doesn't have anything, but he has more, he's representing more barrels of oil per person than them.
Than those persons.
Than those same sheiks you see floating around with the supercars and whatnot.
Correct.
So we as Guyanese must internalize it is a wealthy country. The government's responsibility now to transform that wealth into better living standards for Guyanese across the board, into better opportunities for Guyanese across the board, and into ensuring that at the very least we don't get basics wrong, like GPL, like an education system which is still not performing the way it should. These types of things should be knocked out in short order. But the unfortunate thing is that on the way that the PDP intends to run this country, happy to pretend there's no money and happy to let all of these little things continue to slide.
All right. I wanted to update my viewers. I know that a lot of persons would have seen the Miss Carol Smith Joseph, who went over to Suku as she was summoned to Suku in relation to some amount of charges. When she got there, she was actually slapped with about 14 charges
Okay.
that she should go and, you know, she's going to be in court, I think it's December 16th, to hear of these matters. And, you know, the PPP government is one who is clearly vindictive, vexatious, and they have no qualms about it, because from what we're understanding, and I think we'll probably in a little bit be able to pull up the clip where the lawyer explains what it is, but basically these charges are coming based on her sitting on a board. She wasn't the chairman of the board, the secretary of the board, nothing like that, merely a director on the board. And they're claiming that the board would have made some sort of payments that they don't agree with. And that's what they're investigating. In 2016, mind you, the government has been in power for 2 years. And if this was something, I mean, why now? Basically, as soon as that, she would have filed the court hearings or documents regarding the local government election issue, which has actually put a damper and a stop into this local government election and this list that we're talking about here. All of a sudden, 1 day later, she's summoned by Suku.
Yeah, well, I would say that the government's decision to file these charges now is interesting.
It's definitely political. That's what I can say as much.
That's
I will ask my operator to pull up the comments from the lawyer so we can hear that in just a few. All right. Yeah, so he'll pull that video up and we will hear what the lawyer would have said in this regard. But I promise that next week I will have a guest where we will talk much more about these kind of matters, which has been going on for a while. And I really think we need to begin to address it. I think we have it here on the screen. You can go.
Thank you very much for being here. As you know, Ms. Carol Joseph was invited to attend the SOCO offices this morning. Upon her arrival, she was arrested by officers of SOCO. Mr. Ramana informed her she was under arrest. Thereafter, they read 14 charges to her. Police officers Prasad, Khan, and Singh each read somewhere around between 6, 5, and 6 charges to her relating to an alleged offense that occurred in 2016. As you know, Ms. Joseph is the claimant who brought the proceedings in which City Council Court appeared for her that successfully derailed the local government elections, causing GCOM to admit that they did not comply with the law. And I believe that these charges that they intend to file is a direct response to the fact that they have brought the actions against GCOM, and the GCOM has in effect admitted as a result of the action brought by Ms. Joseph that they erred by not following the law. So just the date of the allegations, I think, speak for themselves. This is May 2016. We are now in 2022. The present administration has been in office since 2020, and no attempt was made to lay these allegations until after Ms. Joseph commenced proceedings against GCOM. Senior Counsel Ford is here. He is actually counsel in that matter. He can speak in more detail to that. Mr. Ford.
Good morning, members of the media. As my colleague, Mr. Hughes, would have said just now, we are convinced by the fact that they have brought these charges after that matter will be disputed, that this is a response, this is a retaliation to the fact that that matter was filed, causing the local government elections to be postponed. I believe that they are seeking to intimidate the members of the opposition, which intimidate to represent the fact that we do not want to participate in a process that is flawed. That is where we are now.
Is there a date for more questioning?
Ms. Joseph has to return on the 16th of December at 9.
So there we have it, and you would have heard the lawyer's explanation to what would have occurred today at Suku. And I mean, I think they put it best. It is intimidation, because Miss Carol, as most persons would know, is the APNU AFC chief scrutineer in our elections process, anything to do with GCOM in that regard. And we had that case that you just heard about as well that was filed recently. And now you have these charges coming up. And I just want persons to understand what we're dealing with. And we need to understand that once we continue to push, and as citizens, we continue to call for the things that are right, we should not take intimidation in whatever form it comes, that we should hold resolute and stand for what is right in this situation. I don't want to go too much into details because, as you know, this is now coming up, and I will allow the attorneys to talk more on this matter. And as I said, next week program, I will have one of those attorneys with us, one of the attorneys, and we will talk about what the government has been doing in this regard, and, you know, what we need to do as citizens of a country to ensure that this doesn't become new. Because what you're seeing happening all over is persons are being charged here, there, everywhere for things that make no sense once they come up or stand up against the government. And these things are only permitted to happen because we as citizens allow it to happen, you know. I know we're almost out of time, so I thought we needed to talk about that. And when I'm finished giving you a few minutes to give your closing thoughts, we'll talk something about youth, something fresh, something that is coming. I want us to talk about that too. But, you know, before we close off this much serious part of our program, I'll give you the opportunity to say.
Well, what I would say, you know, just as to comment on what we're seeing there, the unfortunate circumstances we're seeing there with Ms. Joseph, is that I think that this again points to the need for us to have objective, non-political bodies dealing with our law enforcement issues in this country. I think that it's unfortunate that the government continues to fall prey to political actions. We need to see an objective system. We need a system that is much more objective, where citizens can have confidence. Because every time a charge is filed, people don't have the type of confidence that they should have. So that's what we need to see from the government in order for the country, I think, to be able to move forward. This is really, really, really unfortunate. And we must remember that every time something like this happens, it is happening to a human being. You know, it is not an object that is facing these difficult circumstances. So we as citizens have to be sympathetic to that. And always look towards a fair system of justice. That's my thoughts on that element of it. Now, when you talk about fairness and justice, and you talk about the national budget, you know, there's no fairness and justice to be found there at all. No fairness and justice to be found there at all. And from that perspective, I think that looking towards, because we're now coming to the end of the year, it's going to be a new year, new budget. We as citizens must look closely to see what is going to be, what this new year is going to look like. We must pressure the government to address issues that need to be addressed, like GPL and so on. GWI.
Most disgusting for this year.
Absolutely, you know,
the water
quality is unbelievable.
Who can believe over the 2015 to 2020 we had such clean, nice water?
It was great.
To what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
Rust and coke.
tangibly terrible.
Literally rust and coke coming out through the
I
pipe.
went to make some coffee for myself the other day, and the water was darker than the coffee that I was making.
Correct.
I mean, my. So those types of things, we have to look at the next budget. We have to look at the next budget to see what are going to be the priorities again.
Mm-hmm.
We must recall that Guyana is going to grow between 20 and 25% again next year.
Mm-hmm.
And we must demand from the government better standards of living, because it is not acceptable that just a few people are able to benefit and the broader population continues to punish. That is the furthest thing from acceptable, and we will continue to carry that fight. And citizens, we ask that you carry that fight as well.
Yeah, and I want to say at this time, we stand with Miss Carol Smith Joseph on this matter, and we will continue to support her and anyone that this government feels that it can just, be vindictive to anyhow, any way they wish. We as citizens must stand up and we must fight. And I continue to implore to Guyanese, the only way we can help stop these matters is us holding the government accountable. I want to say thank you once again for coming on the program. It's always a pleasure having you here. So, and I'm sure I'll have you again in a few. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. At this time, I want to let you know, I'll ask my operator to just drop this flyer for me, and I'll talk about it. Let me see. Correct. So, as you can see on your screen, the PNCR, the GY, through the Guyana Youth Student Movement, the GYSM, will be hosting once again a Green Line on the 26th of December, as they have done many times before. This is the return, and it has this new theme. It says it's the Fed Up Edition. So it's going to be the Green Line, the Fed Up Edition, where you can see there will be persons like Kwesi A's, DJ Magnum, DJ Reality, Fame Band, and a lot of persons will be coming on board, and quite a few other artists will be there. It will be pretty much a big show, a big line. You'll be hearing a lot of, a lot of other artists will be there. And, this is a reintroduction since COVID and that kind of stuff. And we're asking that you come out and you support the youth arm of the party in this event, as we support each other and we come out. Now, there is also going to be a lot of prizes that will be given away, prizes for the best Fed Up costume and that kind of stuff. It's going to be exciting. So I want you to start sharing this flyer, start telling a friend about Green Line, the Fed Up Edition. And I promise you as well, next week I will have with me the chairman of the GYSM, where he will be able to sit down with you and talk a little bit more about the entire concept of Green Line and, the Fed Up Edition and what you should expect and the kind of artists that will be there. But I'm gearing you up for this, and I'm telling you, share the flyers. We have them on our pages, and ensure you tell the young people in your community about it. Let's share this and let's support it. All right. So once again, I want to thank you for joining Facing the Nation for today. And we'll be here again next week at the same time, 12:30 to 1:30, as we continue to interact with you, have conversations with you, so that we can move this country forward and talk about the issues to have them corrected. Once again, thank you for joining Facing the Nation. Do have a wonderful afternoon.
'Cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice bread, not one garage, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo. Take time on night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no more. We ain't giving up no. We ain't giving up.